to belong. I wanted to be one of them, but it was so clear that I was kind of geeky and nerdy and funny and always cracking jokes in the hallway. And he wanted to change me. He wanted me to be like the other girls. And it was so obvious that I wasn't. And it was so obvious later on that they weren't my tribe. My tribe in high school ended up being the drama kids, the kids that were in band, the nerdy, intellectual, smart girls. That was my clan. And it took me a while to figure out that I wasn't one of the cheerleaders. I was one of the nerds. And essentially, I was the queen of the nerds. Or so I like to think.
Well, I love the San Gabriel Valley.
Welcome to the My SGV podcast.
So I grew up here and I still live in Alhambra.
I was raised in between Temple City and Alhambra.
Eventually resided in South San Gabriel.
Our mission is to capture and share the stories of the people of the San Gabriel Valley.
Monterey Park has pretty much been my whole life.
Well, I'm proud to say that I was born and raised in the San Gabriel Valley.
We believe our diversity is what makes the SGV great. And no matter where you are from, in the San Gabriel Valley, you will feel welcome. All right, SGVers, welcome back to another episode of the My SGV podcast. And if you are a returning listener, thank you so much for spending this time with us. We do appreciate it. Well, if you're watching online, you'll notice that I'm in Scott's chair again this week. He's unfortunately away on business, so it'll just be me and Victoria running the show today. So, Victoria, we sort of were talking about before the show, the lead-in, right, to our guest, and I was like, oh, this can be a heavy topic, and I have some stories about my personal stories about domestic violence, but do you know anybody who's encountered or experienced the domestic violence?
Not that I know of. I can't think of anybody who has shared that information with me if they have gone through it.
You're, I guess, lucky in that sense. I mean, you're still very young too, so.
Yeah.
But I say that because most women have experienced domestic violence in some form. And a lot of people, like when they hear that, they think only like physical, but the actual definition includes like mental, emotional, financial, all kinds of abuse. And I shared on this show, I think before, the relationship I had before my wife was a violent one. The first that I've ever had in my life that was violent towards me. I was pushed for the first time, and that was like just so shocking to me that anybody laid their hands on me, And the worst of the physical violence was she had thrown a unfinished mirror on my leg and sliced my leg open, and I needed 21 stitches. And I think it was like 13 external and 8 internal. It was a pretty bad cut. But the scary thing is that even then, I still stayed in the relationship. Even then, like that wasn't enough to be like, you know what, maybe you should go. So I really understand what it means to like feel trapped or like even like give excuses for them, even in like those circumstances where it was so clear to everybody else. They're like, what are you doing? And I'm like, oh, I can still look for an excuse to give or make for them for this behavior, Yeah. So sort of a heavier lead into today's guest, but it's going to be a great story, and I'm excited to share that with all of you. But before that, thank you, Paris Baguette, for providing the delicious treats for our guests every show. We do appreciate it. They're very tasty. Every time we look in that box, the guests are like, oh, a whole box. So thank you to Paris Baguette in San Gabriel. Go check them out on Las Tunas. Say hi to Jason for us. All right, now to today's guest. She's dazzled the realms of writing and acting with her talents and unique flair. From her humble beginnings into her career in Los Angeles, she's not only penned the young adult memoir, Queen of the Nerds, she's also captivated audiences across the British Isles, Canada, and the United States with her theater company, Feyland Productions. She's a master of the stage and the page, an award-winning writer who tackles tough topics like consent and bullying, empowering teens through her engaging book discussion groups. She's a multi-talented force, a print model and voiceover artist whose voice has graced both commercials and narratives, a woman who turned her passions into a thriving career, proving that with enough perseverance and heart, you can indeed live your dream. Let's welcome to the show the inspirational Reverie Fey. Welcome to the show.
Goodness, thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm happy that you're here. So we met through a former guest.
That's right.
Who introduced us, and I first, I think I met with you. We emailed a little bit, and then we met over Zoom, and then we met at I forget what that was.
It was a Rotary Club meeting. I'm part of the Rotary Club in Monrovia.
That's right. And then you shared this experience of yours, which we're going to get into later on in the show. But before all that, what is your connection to the San Gabriel Valley?
Well, I've lived in the area on and off for about 15 years. I worked there, I lived there. I lived in Monrovia for a really long time, and I love it. It's just got voted again as America's top 10, what would you call it? It got voted in the top 10 of the most American cities, which I think is wonderful.
Really? Wow. I love being up there, like you're just right up against the mountain, right?
Oh, it's gorgeous.
Yeah. And where are you from originally?
You know, my background is interesting. I grew up in Texas. My family were from Saginaw, Michigan, which of course is from a folk song. But I grew up in Texas, and I got the unique opportunity to travel abroad. A lot of people think, oh, are you a military brat? And actually, I'm not. I'm just a well-traveled American. I ended up living in Paris when I was 16. I got a wonderful opportunity to live with a French family, and it really broadened my horizons and made me realize, after going through such a difficult time, that I'm not stuck in this situation forever, that there's so much of the world to go out and explore and experience. So at a young age of 16, while I was learning French, I realized, you know what? I'm not going to be stuck here forever. I'm going to travel, I'm going to get educated, and hopefully one day I'll be able to perform all over the world, and I'll break out of this realm that I'm in, and that's exactly what I've done. I ended up studying in England, and I ended up living over there for 6 years. I spent a lot of time in Ireland. I toured all over Scotland. I lived and worked in New York, and I've been out in LA for about 15 years. Wow.
That's a lot of places to live. And
I have.
Not just visit, but live.
Yeah.
Wow. And I hear like I wouldn't say that it's an accent, but there's a certain way that you speak. Do you get that often, that question?
I do. It's funny. I don't hear it anymore, but people always say you have an accent. And I guess technically you'd call my accent a mid-Atlantic accent, because it's not exactly an English accent anymore. It used to be quite thick. But predominantly I get a lot of work playing English roles.
Really?
Yeah, I do.
So you can like turn it on and off.
But this is pretty much my natural voice, my natural speaking voice. And I guess there's a slight lilt, I guess you'd call it.
A lilt? I never heard that word before.
Yeah.
What is that?
I guess it's a way, like you hear the Irish brogue or like the English lilt. It's just sort of I guess like a quipped way that you speak. And really everyone has an accent.
Yeah. And you developed this because you were immersed in the culture there for that time?
I think because I moved at, my formative years, that I ended up picking up an accent.
Okay. And, there's the heavier part of your story. I just want to get a general sense of you and where you've been and sort of come back to there. So you were overseas for some time, and then you came back. Did you come back to the San Gabriel Valley, or where did you come back to?
I did. I lived in New York during 9/11, and I was working on getting my career taking off at the time, and then 9/11 happened and everything changed. And I love New York. I still miss it to this day. But I also miss London as well. And then I just thought, maybe I need to come to LA and see if there's more opportunity. And there definitely was. There's so much to do out here, and the people are absolutely wonderful. There's something about the people in the San Gabriel Valley. They're so open-minded. I mean, you can't really faze anybody. They're just so, involved and open, and they've kind of seen it all, done it all, and they're really easy to talk to. And I really love the area.
Mm-hmm. And when you came from New York, did you land in Monrovia?
I didn't. I lived all over. I lived in Silver Lake for a while, Hollywood, over by LAX as well. I kind of bounced around a lot until I settled down and found a home in Monrovia. Monrovia was actually the very first school that I performed at, and I ended up living around the corner
Oh, okay.
from that school.
You know, the San Gabriel Valley, I had to leave it to discover like what was so special about it coming back.
Right.
You know, because nowhere in the world or in the country was like it, in my opinion, you know, where there was just this huge melting pot of people and ideas and culture and, yeah, it's very different from a lot of places, even big cities. So, well, were you a writer while you were overseas, or when did that all start?
You know, it's interesting, but I started writing, I want to say when I was about 8 years old. My mom bought a typewriter. Remember typewriters?
I do, yeah.
My mom bought a typewriter to teach herself how to type, and I ended up kind of stealing it. And I taught myself how to type, you know, with just 2 fingers. And that's when I started writing, and I kind of never stopped.
What did you write about?
You know, it's funny, but I wrote about children my own age, and now I write for teenagers. So my main characters are always these heroic teenagers that are overcoming some kind of obstacle. And when I was younger, I wrote about 8-year-old children that were overcoming some kind of issue. So I've always been kind of a young adult or a child's author.
Did you share your writing with others at that age?
I did, and you know, I used to illustrate the books. I wish I still had them. That was so long ago, and when you've moved a lot of places, you end up kind of letting things go or you lose things. But I wish I still had all of those. But they're still all in my head.
Oh, you don't have any of those writings?
Oh, I wish I did.
Oh, wow. And when did the acting come into your life?
I've always been a natural performer, and actually when I was very young, I was very shy. I mean, I was afraid to talk to adults. I found them very intimidating, and I was quite small as a child, and gradually I kind of broke out of that mold. Having an older sister and a younger brother kind of helped mold me into, I'm happy for the opportunity that I got to be both the younger sibling and the older sibling. I think there's something about an interesting dynamic of being a middle child. And I always wanted to perform. So I kind of feel like I've always been a performer. But I'd love to go back and meet my kindergarten teacher, because I was such a shy child back then that she would be awfully surprised that I've done all the things that I've done and performed the way I have.
Wow. And in the intro, I said that you write about these maybe tough or difficult topics. And right now you said you write to teens. What do you write about?
Well, my book Queen of the Nerds, is about overcoming sexual assault in high school. I mean, essentially the character is this gangly, physically, she's undeveloped, and she's on the cheerleading squad, and she's really trying hard to fit in and acclimate and be one of the girls, and she's just slightly different than everybody else. And all the other girls know it. And she's kind of shunned. And she's trying so hard to just be like one of the girls and be part of the team. And then things happen, and she goes from being, this kind of nerdy, mousy girl to suddenly being the center of attention and gets voted freshman Duchess. And suddenly this mysterious new guy on the football team has an interest in her, and it's the guy that all the girls want to go out with. So suddenly she's at the forefront and is the most popular girl in school. But things escalate quickly when she starts dating this mystery guy, and he starts verbally and physically abusing her, and eventually it leads to sexual assault and hospitalization. And the hardest thing about it was her going back to school and having to endure bullying and slut-shaming, and it was very difficult. And I should know, because that is actually my story. That's my story that I tell. It's all true, and it happened to me.
Wow. That's a very difficult thing to endure. And you must have had to find a lot of courage to share it in that way with others.
I did. It took a while, but at the core of my being, I'm actually quite a funny person. So when I wrote the book, I wanted it to be not just a book about doom and gloom and sadness and overcoming trauma, but about, there's this fire within all of us. And if you find that fire, you can overcome anything. I mean, it's incredible. And I used humor to kind of get through the bullying. I put on like this wall, this shield. I was always this smiling, funny girl, and nobody knew that inside I was actually hurting. And I just focused on my education and being on stage, and that propelled me out of this quite gloomy situation. And I look back on it, and I'm so glad that I had acting kind of as a backup, and I never thought that acting would be my backup plan to spring me forward out of this, devastating trauma that I went through. But essentially, my book has some funny elements in it, because if you look back on your high school years, yeah, they're a difficult time in your life. I mean, you're going through puberty, you're trying to become an adult, you're trying to find your sense of self. But there was something about the joy that we all experience in high school that helped me get through this difficult time. And I managed to use my humor. And there is a lot of funny stuff in the book that kind of balances out the trauma. It's so unusual to find a book out there like mine, because it's not all about sadness and darkness and going through a difficult time and wanting to commit suicide, which I attempted. I mean, luckily I wasn't successful, but there was something about that fire within me, the humor, you know what, one day I'm going to look back on this and I'm going to be able to laugh. And I look back on that time kind of not with sadness or being upset or emotional, but I look back on that time and I think, wow, what a strong person I am to go through that and write this book and share it in the attempt to hopefully help somebody else who went through a difficult time.
I can't help but think of that young person wanting to belong, right, or be accepted, I guess. And the stories that I hear of survivors is that their fear of sharing because of not being believed or blaming them for their actions. Like, did you experience that? And if you did, what was that like?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I blocked it out. I disassociated in high school. I actually believed that it didn't happen. I was so, it says in my book, magnificently convincing that I even convinced myself that it didn't happen. And it wasn't until years later that, I mean, for instance, when we met, I just openly started telling you about my book and about my experiences. But even like a decade ago, I don't think I was brave enough to go there. Do you know what I mean? You put up a wall, you act like it doesn't exist, that it didn't happen, and eventually that wall has to come down in order for you to grow.
Yeah. What were the circumstances around what had happened? Like, were you friends first? Were you dating?
It all was such a whirlwind. And looking back on it, he was not someone I was even remotely attracted to. But at the time, I don't even like to use the word peer pressure because it's so dated, but there was so much societal pressure on me. I wanted to succeed. I wanted to be popular. I wanted to be well-liked. And I so desperately wanted these other girls on the cheerleading squad to accept me. It was so important that I thought, well, if I have this boyfriend that they all like, maybe they'll like me too. It's kind of, I look back on it as an adult and it's so sick and twisted. It's very demented, because now I would think, well, I don't really even like this person. Why would I want to spend my time with this person? But as an adolescent, all those things were so important to me. And I was also such a parent pleaser. I wanted my parents to be proud of me. I wanted them to think, oh, well, our daughter's okay. I mean, look at her. She's on the cheerleading squad. She's freshman Duchess. She has this popular boyfriend that everyone likes, so everything is okay. That was all on the surface, but underneath, that was not what my reality was.
As a parent myself, I'm curious as to what may have led you to believe you had to earn that from your parents, or that like you had to seek that out rather than it was just innate and they were, going to feel a certain way about you no matter what. Did you ever look back and consider that?
I think I just wanted to make sure that they were proud of me and that, you know, I was a good reflection upon my family. I don't know. It's kind of hard looking back on it. I'm not quite sure how to answer that.
That's okay. Yeah. You know, it's more for my sake. You know, I never want my children to think that they have to do or be anything other than just exist.
Right.
You know, so, well, and so did you disassociate right away and you just continued on with school and life as if this thing never happened?
Well, in the beginning, you know, like I said, I mean, the title Queen of the Nerds is for a reason, because on the surface you see this very cute, petite girl who's on the cheerleading squad, and all the other girls were quite voluptuous and beautiful and they look like young women, and then here was this little girl. And I used to get asked all the time, oh, is this the middle school girl that you invited on to perform with you this week? And I'd be like, no, I'm in high school. I was so small that I look back and I just wanted to belong. I wanted to be one of them, but it was so clear that I was kind of geeky and nerdy and funny and always cracking jokes in the hallway. And he wanted to change me. He wanted me to be like the other girls. And it was so obvious that I wasn't. And it was so obvious later on that they weren't my tribe. My tribe in high school ended up being the drama kids, the kids that were in band, the nerdy, intellectual, smart girls. That was my clan. And it took me a while to figure out that I wasn't one of the cheerleaders. I was one of the nerds. And essentially, I was the queen of the nerds. Or so I like to think.
Did those group of girls, the cheerleaders, were you aware why they didn't accept you, and did they change after you were with this guy?
It didn't change at all. In fact, they all turned against me. And I'm glad that they did, because they showed their true colors. And through going through a difficult time, that was part of the bullying that was going on. I was able to grow from that. I realized, wow, I'm really not like them. I'm like this. I'm like me.
That's quite the lesson and, you know, point to come to at that age that, you know, some adults are still trying to find that out, right? Who's their tribe? Who are they? Where do they belong?
I think we're constantly wondering who our tribe is. And, you know, people come and go in your life. You don't always have the same friends. You know, we move or our friends move away. You don't always have the same kind of subset of friends. That changes. So our tribe is constantly changing and evolving.
What do you think unites a tribe?
Common interests, likes, you know, quirkiness.
Okay. That's why you say it evolves, because those things change over time, like interests and whatnot.
Of course.
Yeah. Okay. And so were your parents aware of what happened?
Well, eventually they did, because I was hospitalized. So they found out. And before all that was happening, I put up a wall. I felt like it was my fault. If I was just a little bit cooler or a little bit prettier, like these other girls, maybe this wouldn't be happening to me. Maybe he wouldn't be so abusive. If I was, you know, more like this girl or that girl, this wouldn't be happening to me. I started blaming myself rather than looking at the situation for what it was, that it was abusive and it was unhealthy and that this was the wrong person for me. I kept blaming myself. So I kept trying to fix it. And that's where the problem lies. You have to just end it. You have to leave that situation, as you know, because it's not going to get any better. It's only going to get worse.
Yeah. Was he your boyfriend for some time? Like, were you dating for a while?
He was, and it was sort of as I said before, it was kind of a whirlwind of events where he found out my birthday and sent me flowers in front of all the cheerleaders. It was a total setup. As an adult, I can look back and I realize it was a total setup to completely, like, bowl me over, wash me over, and sweep me off my feet like it was some Cinderella story. But it turned out to be quite a very dark Cinderella story.
Wow. I think, you know, a term for that now is like love bombing, right? Like to just inundate you with emotions and feelings from the beginning that are just overwhelming.
Absolutely. That's part of the tactic of someone
Sure.
who's kind of on this, I'd say, because he was young, this wave of mental illness or being, mentally disturbed. That's how it starts. Control.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It's all about control.
Yeah.
Right. And then to produce a willing victim.
Yes.
If you will.
And victim blaming.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So what ended up putting you in the hospital?
Well, this is the hard part, and it's probably a little bit of a spoiler alert, but I think because I was so small, when I was sexually assaulted, I ended up getting mono, and I got very, very sick. And when you get mono, you get a high fever. And I think because I think I only weighed like 85 pounds at the time. I was very small, prepubescent, and it almost killed me. And that's later on when my parents had found out that it was from a sexual assault.
Wow.
So it took going to a hospital to kind of break down the wall that I had put up about what was going on. So it's very difficult for me, and it was extremely difficult for my parents, I'm sure.
How did they handle it?
Well, they immediately said, you can't see him anymore. And I had already quickly devised in my mind, well, if we play this game further and I just pretend that we're still together, I can break up with him over the summer and then no one will find out what happened. But, looking back on it, if I was a parent and that had happened to my child, I would have done the exact same thing to try and, get this horrible person away from my child. But the way it ended, it was so obvious that something very tragic happened to me. But when I went back to school, it all got convoluted and the story got changed. And instead of being the victim, I was slut-shamed and made it out like it was my fault and that I had done the wrongdoing and I had kind of essentially, as they say, asked for it, which that wasn't the case.
Can you talk about where you were mentally when, this horrible thing has happened to you and then you're still trying to figure out a way to, this is my own description of it, like almost make it easier for him, rather than harder, or to just come out and powerfully say, what you did was wrong. Instead, you're thinking of like, can I just devise a way to break up with him so it seems normal? Like, what's the thoughts going through your mind in that moment?
I was just trying to save my reputation because I was very well liked. I was, I guess, popular. I didn't see myself that way, but I was very well liked, and especially when you're a cheerleader, you have this image to uphold, and I didn't want to shatter that illusion essentially, and I didn't want to bring shame and pain on my family, so I just tried to make up these excuses. And even before the assault, I tried to make up these reasons. Oh, if only I was a better girlfriend, if only I wasn't so nerdy, if I wasn't so geeky, if I wasn't so friendly, he would treat me better. Or if I wasn't so undeveloped, maybe he would be nicer to me. I kept making all these excuses and all these reasons for his bad behavior that it had to do with me, rather than, as an adult, I would think, well, you are the problem. I was completely gaslit and didn't even know what that term meant.
So something like sexual assault doesn't just happen in isolation. There must have been other things that were happening to you, or his behavior towards you in the relationship, and maybe you didn't know at the time, or maybe you also excused those things. But do you remember what else was going on that now you look back and you're like, oh, that was not, acceptable?
I think what was going on with the football player, and I like to refer to him as that because that's what he was. And I know it's very stereotypical, but stereotypes fit sometimes. I think he had a sports enhancement drug issue, and I think that was the reason why he had these violent outbursts and his behavior was erratic. I think he had this drug problem. And at the time, it was acceptable for an athlete to take a drug like that. It wasn't considered to be a drug. It would be like, almost like taking an energy drink. Well, he's an athlete, you can take steroids or whatever he was doing to, enhance your performance. And that's when his personality started to change. Because at first he was a wonderful love bomber, all the flowers and gifts and candy. I mean, he seemed like the ideal boyfriend. But underneath, it was never like that. But I think that he had obviously some mental health issues. But I think when you compound that with drug taking, it's just a Molotov cocktail.
Oh, sure. I know of that as, not personally. I know of that as like rage. Like they say, there's like a rage, a testosterone fueled rage.
Yes.
Right? And that's not even to mention the size and strength that also accompanies someone who's taking those enhancing drugs. I mean, a large adult male is going to have a difficult time with someone who's taking drugs. So I don't know what an 85-pound cheerleader is going to be able to do against someone like that. So you were in the hospital. That's how your parents found out.
And also, I want to add this, that his parents expected a lot out of him. They kept telling him he was perfect and that he could never do any wrong. And I think that can develop into making a person become psychotic. You kind of become a little psycho. You're running around thinking that you're perfect. You never do anything wrong, that it's always somebody else. It's never you. It's always the circumstances or the other person or society. You blame it on someone else, but it's never you. And we kind of talked about this before, like the way to depict if someone is normal and healthy or if they have a psychosis, if they have a mental illness, is whether or not they accept responsibility for their actions or not.
Sure. Big red flag if they can't.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the sign of mental health is like how flexible are you mentally? How willing are you to accept new ideas and changes and whatnot? And there's a rigidity in people with mental illnesses that it's difficult for them to think any other way than how they've been thinking. Well, Reverie, we ask each guest to bring an item with them. What did you bring with you today?
I brought, and I find this so funny, I brought my old cheerleading skirt from my senior year.
Okay.
So yeah, this is it. Tiny skirt. Don't ask me if it still fits, because it really doesn't. It fits differently.
That's quite short. That's for like high school.
Oh yeah, and actually,
that seems very short.
Some of the girls' skirts were shorter than mine.
Wow. Okay.
Even though I was the smallest. But I brought this in because I find this so funny. It's ironic, but I've lived all these different places. As I told you, I've lived in Paris, I've lived in London, I've lived in Glasgow, I've lived in Ireland, I've lived in New York, I've lived out here, and I have always had this cheerleading skirt with me. And at first I thought it's ironic. I'd maybe wear it to clubs or make a Halloween costume out of it, and people would figure out, wait a minute, that's an authentic cheerleading skirt. What are you doing with that? And I would tell people, well, I was a high school cheerleader and a Texas high school cheerleader, and nobody believed me. And I realized all this time, I've always had this cheerleading skirt hanging up in my closet, and now it's like a reminder of how far I've come. That there's still this cheerleading skirt in my closet, perhaps in my repertoire. Not that I want to go back to that, but I've always had this cheerleading skirt. In every closet I've lived in, I've always had it. I've kept it for some reason, and I think that's the reason why, to see how much I've grown and how far I've come in my lifetime.
Yeah. Wow.
So that's why I brought this in.
That's a beautiful story. Thank you for sharing that. You made a distinction between a regular cheerleader and a Texas cheerleader. So is there a difference?
I think there is.
Okay.
I think that the Texas cheerleaders are the quintessential cheerleaders, especially in high school. I mean, in Texas, football is everything. And if you are a high school Texas cheerleader, you're in the in crowd.
I see.
Whether or not you feel like you are, you're in the in crowd.
Huh. Okay, is that like where the whole town like shuts down on a Friday night and everybody's at the game, like that kind of Texas town?
Very much so.
Wow.
But
Okay.
you know, it's funny, but I'm so not a Texan now. I mean, I am. I'm proud of that. I'm proud of everything that I've done in my life, but I'm so not a Texan. And the reason why is because when I went back to Austin, someone said to me, "Are you going to the tailgate?" And I'm thinking, tailgate? What is a tailgate? To me, tailgating was when I would follow behind somebody closely when I was driving in Ireland, or tailgating in New York and blowing a horn. To me, that's tailgating. And then someone said, "No, silly, a tailgate party, you know, where we put the tailgate down on the truck and you know, crack open the beers and have a barbecue or a picnic." And I thought, God, where was I through all of that? I guess I was busy studying or performing on stage.
Mm-hmm.
So in that sense, I'm just not a Texan. But having said that, people from Texas are wonderful. They're the funniest people to be around. I have this thing, and of course it's meant in a humorous way, but the craziest people in the world, and not in any certain order, they are Texans, Australians, and South Africans. They are the craziest, most fun-loving people on the planet.
Okay. South Africans, every time I hear that, I have to hear the accent. It's a very special, unique accent that they have.
It is.
Well, Reverie, I want to get more into your story and so maybe some of your acting and your book. But let's take a quick break and we'll be right back.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Sometimes, even the best of us can slip up. That's why the law offices of Scott Wormuth are here to pick you back up again.
And while they strive to get you the biggest compensation possible, oh my gosh!
Their main concern is your health and recovery. They work closely with doctors and insurance companies to make sure you get the proper medical treatment.
Initial consultations are free, so give them a call.
At the law offices of Scott Wormuth, we're with you all the way.
I'm Scott Wormuth. We've been fighting for your rights for more than 40 years.
All right, we're back with Reverie. Reverie, before the break, actually during the break, we were kind of talking about the organic nature and feel of the show, and I'm glad that it works for you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we never preload any questions on this show in case you're new to the show. It's all organic conversation, and it sort of goes wherever the conversation naturally flows. So before we get back to your story, when we come back from the break, we like to ask questions from this deck of cards called Icebreakers, and they're just a fun way for the audience to get to know us a little bit better, and you can choose to answer or not. Okay. So, and Victoria's going to answer too. So here we go. If you could have any celebrity be your best friend, who would you pick?
All right, who's going first?
I'll go first. I'm not really into celebrities at all,
Right.
I'm just not into it, but I think Keanu Reeves is like really cool. Like he
Cool.
rides a motorcycle, he surfs, he's really fit, and he's like just a down to earth guy, you know, like riding the subway, he'll talk to the public, you know, he's just down to earth. So it would definitely be Keanu Reeves.
Interesting.
Yeah. And you know, cause he was in the Matrix too, like that's pretty cool.
Right. Love that movie.
Yeah.
So one question, living or dead?
Oh, either.
Either? Well, dead, I'd have to choose George Orwell. Because I'd love to just sit down and say, "So, George, what do you think of social media?"
Yeah.
And just have him say, "You know what, I'd be rolling in my grave if I were dead. But I'm alive now. Thanks for dusting me off." So that would be my choice if I could choose anyone.
Yeah.
I don't know. The first name that popped into my head was Taylor Swift.
Okay.
I guess just like first, like you say celebrity, that's kind of like the first one I think of. And I think she'd be cool to hang out with as well. But yeah, that's just kind of the first one that came to mind.
Okay. Well, if you're listening or watching online, if you could have any celebrity be your best friend, who would you pick? Please let us know. Interesting, George Orwell. Like,
Thank you.
What's the truth? Who are the people that like are to twist the truth and spin it? I forget what he calls them, but there's so much of that, it seems, you know, going on in society today. It'd be a very interesting conversation with him.
I wonder how he would perceive our world, because it's very much Orwellian the way it is now. But yet we accept it. We post everything up on social media. We divulge everything about our lives. Where he was very private, and he wanted people to be able to, keep their privacy, their intimacy. But yet we kind of put everything out there in the open now, don't we?
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I think he'd be rolling in his grave.
I was just driving around Pasadena yesterday, and I was like, wow, every intersection has cameras everywhere now. Everywhere. Every single one.
Yeah, and we're constantly filming ourselves, taking selfies, and, constantly, filming ourselves. I was doing a modeling shoot, and I couldn't believe it. This girl was on the shoot with me, and she wanted to find out what her bra size was. So she measured herself and then grabs her phone and is talking about her bra size and then posts it on social media. I was just like,
wow.
Well, we really do this. But we do. We kind of tell everybody what's going on all the time.
Yeah.
It's such a strange world.
Indeed. Well, so back to your story. When did you decide that you were going to share your story in the form of a book for others?
I started working on this book shortly after I moved to Monrovia. So kind of the book was conceived in Monrovia. And it took me a decade to write it. And then I hired a couple of different editors to work on it. And I've been looking for an agent for a really long time for it. And it became a moral imperative to tell my story, because I knew that essentially I could be saving someone's life. And it just became so important. And it's become my life's work.
Mm. I think, as a survivor of trauma myself, that once you reach the level where you are sharing that story with others in the hopes of empowering, saving, that's like the pinnacle of like healing.
Yes,
right?
Absolutely.
So you're over the pain, you're doing better in life, but then you still need to share it out there for others to hear.
Absolutely. And I find that you never completely heal from it. It's always there. But it can either break you or make you stronger. It's really a choice.
That was going to be my next question, is like, how has that event affected your relationships in adulthood?
Yeah, it affects me every day of my life, and I find that I'm constantly trying to garner respect, getting respect, to make sure I'm always respected. And it's something that has taken me a long time to get to this place where I think, wait a minute, I don't want to be treated this way. I should be treated with respect, and be treated with respect at all times. I try and always be respectful and kind to everyone, and I expect that in return. But it's amazing how hard that is for some people to be respectful.
For some people to be respectful, not for them
in general,
to assert themselves to demand respect.
Well, both. For people to be respectful to someone else, but also to learn, hey, you need to be respected. Don't let that man or that woman treat you that way.
Here's an imaginary scenario for you, okay? So you're in line at Starbucks, and a person just cuts right in front of you. What do you say?
You know what? Honestly, and I think this is true for everyone, it really depends on your mood. Have you had a really awful day? Because you might behave incorrectly if you've had a really bad day. But honestly, I usually just laugh. You're better off laughing, just like dealing with LA traffic. You're better off laughing than getting angry and getting into the road rage. You're better off laughing.
So you won't say anything?
You know what? Then again, you're talking about caffeine, and coffee's very important in my life. So if I haven't had a cup of coffee, I might go, hey, I'm first.
So for the listening audience, if you can't see, like both of her fists are balled up, like ready to, punch an individual.
It's all about the coffee.
So, what's crazy? Like as an adult, I realized that asserting myself, if there's a spectrum, right? Like complete stranger and person closest to me, it gets harder, like the closer I get to the person who's most important to me. And I realized that was because growing up, that was how I survived, or that's how I maintained my connection to the people who were closest to me, namely my mom and my brother, right? So if they upset you, like how could you bring up this thing because you didn't want to lose favor with them. You didn't want them to be upset. You didn't want them to withdraw love from you.
Right.
So you just shut up.
It's hard to assert yourself.
Yeah.
That's another thing, learning how to be assertive, but not come across as being aggressive.
Well, I think that's the challenge. I think that people like me grew up thinking that assertiveness equates to aggressiveness, but it really doesn't. You know, for people who are not used to just asserting themselves and saying, like you said, like, I deserve this respect, assertiveness can sound or feel like aggressiveness. And certainly to those who are used to abusing someone, they'll think that you're being aggressive by asserting boundaries, but it's typically the people who are used to violating boundaries that view it as aggressive that I found in my life, you know, that they don't like now this boundary that you've set, and they're going to think that you're being aggressive with them.
Right. And I try really hard not to fall back on the kind of poor me issue, because I'm, 5'2", 5'3", and I want to be assertive and I want my voice to be heard. I kind of feel like I have to let that tiny girl roar come out, you know? So that's why I don't want to come across as being aggressive, but yet I want my voice to be heard, but I don't want to like fall back on that, oh God, I'm going to cry thing. You know, that does happen sometimes when you're trying to get your point across or trying to get respect from somebody. And when you're dealing with someone that you love, that can kind of come out because you don't want to lose their love or affection. You get kind of upset or angry or emotional. It's good to learn how to contain your emotions. It's something I'm still working on to this day.
Love's supposed to be patient and kind, though, so and give you space to express emotion like anger, frustration, confusion, sadness. You know, that's what love is. And the sad part of love that some people experience growing up is that you can't express. You know, you can't express, or else I'm going to withdraw my love from you, which is a terrible thing.
A lot of it has to do with your upbringing as well. And one of the wonderful things about living in the San Gabriel Valley is the culture is so different. I mean, not only do you hear Portuguese being spoken, or Chinese, or Spanish, or French, but the different cultures, people treat each other differently. I found that by living abroad. And sometimes the stereotypes fit, but a lot of it has to do with your upbringing, where you grew up, what country you grew up, what was your religion, were your parents still together?
Sure.
Were you raised by grandparents or by an aunt? All those things come into play with how you treat someone else or how you communicate.
Sure. And if you had an opportunity to go back and to speak to young Reverie, what would you say to her before this event, before this whole, wanting to belong in the tribe that wasn't really yours?
Be true to yourself.
And what does that mean?
Well, don't let anybody tell you how you should think or feel or be, or how you should dress or how you should act. Be yourself. Be truthful and honest with yourself, and be brave. That's something that I've always embraced, as being brave. I can just take off and move to another country on my own and start all over again. Be brave, be adventurous.
That's great advice. Thank you for sharing that. Well, Reverie, we're going to move on to the final portion of the show where we get to learn more about what you like in the San Gabriel Valley. So, Reverie, this is what we call the SGV3, and we ask you to share your 3 favorite or most memorable places or experiences in the San Gabriel Valley. So, it's a tough thing to narrow down to 3.
It really is. I have so many great experiences of living in the area, so I really had to think about this one, and I had to come up with the first 3 that popped into my head.
Okay.
So the first one, and it was when I first moved to the area, I went hiking in Eaton Canyon with a really good friend of mine, native Californian, and we hiked, I want to say it was over 10 miles. We hiked 10 or 12 miles, went off the beaten path, went into nature, absolutely beautiful. I really overexerted myself, and I think it was when I was in probably the best shape of my life, hiking every weekend. And we got to this stream, which, you know, we've been in a drought for so long, not currently now, but at the time we were in such a horrible drought, and we found this stream, and I remember taking my shoes off, and my feet were so blistered from walking all that way, and I remember putting my feet in the water, and it was just like heaven. And my friend has a picture of me, and it's funny, but I think it's the most beautiful kind of ugly picture of me because I'm all sweaty, you know, I've been hiking, I've got no makeup on, and I'm looking right at the camera, and it was just like, and it's such a beautiful picture of me because it's so in the moment. And then as soon as we got done, we had to hack it back, and we ran out of water, and I remember looking at my friend Ron, and both of us are just panting like dogs and looking at each other, and if it weren't for that eye contact, I think my bones would still be somewhere on the trail. We kept pushing each other, and we made it back, and we had dinner with friends and jumped into a pool, still in our hiking gear, and had authentic Mexican food and margaritas, and I just remember thinking, this is the life. So Eaton Canyon, definitely number one.
A 10-mile hike, you gotta I think have on you 3 liters at minimum, and that's a lot.
Oh, and it was a very hot day. I think it was over 100 degrees.
Oh wow! So yeah. And that's a lot of weight too to carry.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. What a beautiful story.
Thank you. So the second one, I was living in Monrovia, and a really good friend of mine, Terry, lived at the top of Monrovia Canyon. Most amazing view of the city. And it was her son's 12th birthday, and we had just become friends, and we're lifelong friends now. Again, another native Californian. So I'm at her house baking a cake, and I look out and I see what I think is a baby bear in the pool. And everyone who's lived in Monrovia has a bear story. If you've lived there long enough, you have a bear story. So here's mine, and this is my first one. So I look out, and I say to Terry's boyfriend, I think that's a bear in the pool, but it's not very big. And all of a sudden he goes, yes, it is. And I look, and the bear starts to get out of the pool, and the displacement of water suddenly drops, and I realize, okay, it's not a baby bear, which, wait a minute, might be good, because if it's a baby bear, there's a mama bear, and that's really dangerous. So this bear gets out, and it's big. To me, it's really big. And then Terry's boyfriend says to me, oh, that's a teenage bear. And I'm thinking, that's a teenage bear? It's huge, and it's standing on its 2 feet. And he goes running outside with pots and pans, and is banging, and yelling, and chasing after this bear. And it sees Dave and runs off into the woods, and I think, that's a teenage bear? It's 200 pounds. It's the same size as my friend, and he chases it off, and he says, oh, you know, the mama bear came, and that bear was 500 pounds, and I'm thinking, can you walk me out to my car, please? I think I'm done baking. So that was my first encounter with a bear in Monrovia, and luckily I was in the house.
And that was one of your most memorable experiences in the San Gabriel Valley.
Yes.
Awesome. Yeah. You're a great storyteller.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
And the third one, I've always been active, and I walk a lot. And I would walk in Monrovia all the time to kind of cool down, do my little cool down walk, 2-3 miles. And October is the month of my birthday, and I'm a big lover of Halloween. And I just have such fond memories of walking through Old Town Monrovia and through all the homes and seeing all the decorations, all the Halloween decorations, and they do it so well. And I just remember the weather changing. It was getting cooler. It wasn't so hot out. And just looking at all the spooky skeletons and witches and hearing all the cackling and getting ready for the trick-or-treaters to come down the street. And I just remember thinking, God, Monrovia is like the perfect place to live.
For those who don't know, there's that one street in Monrovia up north, like up higher, that all those houses there are just incredible every year, right?
Absolutely.
and the street is just filled with people.
It's the place to go for trick-or-treating. It really is.
Yes. I've only been there once because I could only fight the crowds, one time to see. But I remember one house had, it could have been like 100 carved pumpkins. Like carved, all hand carved.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I know the one. And there was also a home that had a ship protruding out the side of it.
Oh, wow.
I never got to go through there, but they had a ship. I don't know how they did it. It looked like a ship had just wrecked into the side of their home, and I guess they had a haunted house there. I never went to it, but it sounded like it was amazing.
What a cool thing to have in your city if you love Halloween.
Yeah.
Do you go there now and brave the crowds on Halloween?
I don't, not so much, but I'm still involved with my community in Monrovia through Rotary Club. So I'm still involved, and I'm just grateful that I'm in a place in my life now where I can give back to the community and do some charity work. It means a lot to me. I think it's important.
Awesome. Well, Reverie, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your story with us. If people want to get a hold of your book or get in touch with you, what's the best way to do that?
Through my website, which is reveriefey.com. It's spelled REVERIE and F like Frank, EY.com. Or you can find me on Instagram. I'm on Instagram under the handle Queen of the Nerds Memoir.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
There you go. Another episode in the books for you. It started off, really heavy, and, the subject matter was definitely, more on the heavier side of the show, but definitely something important. And one thing that Reverie had shared before the show is that if you don't know someone with who has experienced domestic violence or have experienced it yourself, it may be that they just haven't shared it, and it's something that affects all of us in one way or another. And again, the term domestic violence, most people just automatically think like physical abuse, but it does involve a lot of other types of abuse. So
the psychological
absolutely.
aspect is the most difficult. But no matter what happens, you can overcome anything.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. So thank you for spending this time with us. If you want to support the show in a more meaningful way, please consider becoming a patron on Patreon. We're under the MySGV podcast name. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. You can find the full back catalog of episodes on our website, mysgv.net. And until next week, we'll see you then. Thank you for joining us on the MySGV podcast. Check out more of our content on our website, mysgv.net. This show was produced by Scott Wormuth, directed by Russell Mano, edited by Victoria Allers, and original music by Yone OG. If you'd like to join us next week as we capture and share more stories from our diverse community, feel welcome.
Nice mother. No, kind of mother.